Um, so we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about memory. Now, memory, as we were just discussing a little bit earlier, it's really personalized to each one of our own experiences, isn't it? We all remember things a certain way. We all tend to have a way that we favor, either working with our hands or reading about it or going through the procedures, whatever it is, whatever your process is, it's personalized to you because you know you best, don't you? However, there are a lot of things that we are very similar on as far as how we remember things, not only as individuals, but as a group. And many of us will probably fall into some of these categories that we talked today. Now, it's important to understand with memory, again, and I revert back to my original discussion with you earlier in the semester, is that psychology is what kind of science? Does anybody remember?
Is it science that behaviors and stuff like that?
Right. Yeah. It's not a hard science. It's a soft science, right? If you remember me, if you recall me saying that, speaking of memory, but hard sciences are more of the chemistry, the biology, the physics, whereas we operate in norms and theories. And that's exactly what we're going to be exploring today is different ways to look at memories. Your book gave us three, I believe it was three types of, or three theories of memories, models of memories that we operate off of. There are a couple other ones out there. You may have encountered some either through your schooling or through your studies or research if you're doing anything like that. Or maybe you have your own personal beliefs how memories are going. I'm not discounting anything. I'm just kind of presenting to you what some of the popular ones are in psychology. And so you can kind of pick and choose which one works best with you. It's really all the same idea. And again, we don't have little electrodes that we can measure voltage within our brain to see exactly how information is flowing and how neural nets are processing information, can we? So to that end, again, just take a lot of this with a grain of salt. This is not hard science. These are people that have tested in some way how these theories work and have come up with some pretty interesting conclusions. Okay, so any questions before we begin? Okay, all right. So I'd like for all of you right now to think of your earliest memory. Can anybody kind of recall their earliest memory in time? Like the first, maybe it was a dream, maybe it was an experience. Does anybody remember that? If that cares to share?
Mm, I remember. I think I was like 3 or 4, and we had like a party for my cousin. So, and then every time that I see the pictures, I have like a vivid memory of like how the whole day happened. So, but that's like probably the only thing that I remember from like my childhood. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So that was probably an emotional time, right? That was I mean, it was a memorable, happy. I'm taking it.
Yeah,
Was it a
most
happy?
definitely happy with like all my family, my dad, my mom, my cousins, and everybody. So yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. As we described back when we're talking about consciousness and dreams, we tend to think, not only dream, but we tend to think in symbols and emotions. Now, think about that moving through, especially when we get to, I think, Wednesday's lecture when we talk about false memories, okay? Because if we're not thinking, our minds don't process information like videotape would, or I know nobody uses videotapes anymore, but maybe a
I
hard drive.
do.
If we have a hard drive that is recording video or audio, right? It's a pattern of ones and zeros that are written to that hard drive, and when we extract them, it extracts them the exact same way that they were recorded. So there's very little room for error unless something happens that the hard drive goes corrupt. But our minds are not like that. Okay, we store, we encode, and we store information a little bit differently, and those are in terms of how we feel in those moments and what those events or people or objects that we're committing to memory mean to us. So, and we can show through research that people that have seen the exact same event, a room full of people see the exact same event or witness the same event, can have many different stories as to what exactly happened because it meant something different for them. And as you shared, your first memory was one you described through emotions, right? It was a happy time, or maybe it was a fearful time. I'll share with you one of my first memories as a child was it was actually a dream of I don't know if many of you, if any of you have seen these piggy banks that have a smiley face, a clown smiling on one side, and on the flip side has a frowny face with crossed eyes. Has anybody ever seen anything like that? But anyway,
I've seen a clown telephone, not a clown piggy.
okay. So anyway, this is a piggy bank that was in my house, and for many years until I was about 4 or 5, I think it broke. But I remember dreams of that clown with the side that was that had that frowny face with the crosses on its eyes chasing me. That was my very first memory, and I don't know why, but that was a fear response. I was fearful of that moment, so therefore that kind of sets the tone. That's a great example of how we really think in terms of fear and happiness and sadness, and put emotions to those events. Okay, so let's come up with a couple definitions here. So what is memory? Does anybody care to share either their definition or one that they got from the book?
Well, I know back when I was little, I would always say this, and this is true, but I know memory now means a little bit more than this. A memory is something you remember.
Okay. Okay.
But I know, well, it means a little more than that, but.
Right. No, it does. So let's come up with a good definition for memory here. As soon as I can get, there we go. Hopefully my screen share is paused. Why is my screen share paused? I apologize. I'll try that again. Love technology, always great until it's not. Okay, hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing here. All right, so memory. Yep, go ahead.
In my fridge.
Say again?
Mask.
I'll probably say that memory is like the process of storing and then remembering.
Okay, absolutely. So it's a process. Now, when we think of processes, we think of something that's cyclical, right? Something that goes around and around. So you said storing.
Excuse me, Professor.
Are you writing on the board? Because
I am. It's not showing up.
Not at all.
I don't know what's happening today. Frustrating. How's that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Weird. Okay. All right. So storing, recalling, and what else?
Adding to that, I think there is in the process of memory we can list encoding too, because I think it should be encoded and then we can store them and then later recall it.
Okay, absolutely. So encoding is the kind of the third piece here we're missing, right? So our definition of, and we'll talk about all three of these processes. So the definition of memory is an active system that senses, organizes, alters, stores, and recalls. Okay. Now all of these um, uh, processes have to be in place for us to really look at memory, okay? We can't just base memory off of somebody's ability to recall something. I mean, that is an important part, but it might be very flawed in our thinking, because if we discount maybe somebody didn't see something or absorb something, that information was not input into their system. For example, if I asked any of you what DBT is. How many of you could tell me what DBT is?
Don't know what it is
Okay, why don't you know what that is?
because I never heard about it. I never
I,
see
right.
anything like that.
I never gave it to you, right? So in that case, it's not a problem with recalling. It's not even a problem with storing. Yeah, you can't process or alter that information or organize it because I never gave it to you. So in that case, we would look at your senses. Where did the failure process and why did that information not get recalled? It's because you never got it, right? So all of these are linear to some extent, but the test of whether any of these other systems work is if we're able to recall that or demonstrate that it was stored in some way. Okay. Now we mentioned the encoding, retrieval, and storage process. Okay. So we'll start with encoding because that's the first stage to memorization. So encoding is converting your environmental and mental stimuli into memorable brain codes. So similar to what we would see in a hard drive. So it's input and according to brain code, we'll put. So similar to your hard drive, if you wanted to record a video, it would have to be encoded in a certain way that your hard drive would be able to store it, right? So that's our first step is encode. Sorry, you know my drawing. I do not have a steady hand when it comes to these electronic pens. So the next step in the process is storing. Now storing, obviously, just like any definition of storage, is to hold that encoded information, okay? All right, and then of course, our last step is recalling, which is pulling information, pulling stored information. Now, I said this is a process. Why? Why is this cyclical? In what way does recall go back into encoding?
Because sometimes the way you remember your memory is not the same when you're gonna remember it in like 2 years. Because sometimes I find it like kind of awkward because I remember something this way today, but then like a few years from now, I'm gonna remember it like differently.
Okay, okay. And there's like a maturation, there's a maturity process that kind of goes into that, right? For example, if if your parents told you not to do something because and you're a child and you just want to do things and you don't understand why parents tell you no, and then you get into your older years or you have your own kids and you're like, oh, that's what they meant. That's not a good idea for me to do that. But right, so maturation might be part of that, but what you're doing is you're recalling that information and then you're re-engaging in that, you're rehearsing that information to form a stronger bond, form a stronger memory, which you are going to then again store into your short-term and long-term memory. And then you might later recall it and then re-encode it again. Okay, so it's a very cyclical process. All right, so the three models that your book describes are, for models of memory, are parallel, distributed, processing. Do we have any computer science majors in this class?
I did computer science for a semester, but
Okay. Well, probably a lot of what we talk about in here, you're going to connect with, because
the
it's
ones
really
and
interesting.
zeros.
Well, yeah, kind of, but parallel distributed processing is also a computer term. And it's interesting. I always find it interesting that we revert our theories to computer processing, because we've developed computers in a representation of what we think our mind works. Okay, we've replicated our mind and our mental functioning into, we've kind of imparted them into computer systems. So we design these systems, and then we say, oh, we're going to describe how the mind works, which I think is also interesting. So we also have levels of processing. Or LOP. And then we have information processing, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to skim over, just kind of give you a little bit of a backbone of what parallel or PDP and LOP are, okay? So parallel distributed processing is a concept that we kind of devised, that memories exist in a network of experiences, and they alter each other as they go along. So for example, we have our 4 senses that come in, all right? So maybe, let's say, we see a woman's face. Of woman, okay? So here, in comes our sight. So our input unit. And then we have a middle unit or a buffer unit. And then we have an output. Now, according to PDP, we have information that comes in. Let's say information A comes in, and it spreads across all 3 knowledge systems that we have, and whatever this middle buffer is. And it, whatever one it's close to. So let's say that this one is our recognition of face. This one is our recognition of gender. And this one might be recognition of inanimate objects, comparing inanimate objects, okay? So that information comes in, and our output, say our question is, we want to know, is this a woman's face? And our answer is going to be yes or no. So, is it a face? Yes. So we'll give that a 1. Is it a man's face? We'll give that a 0, okay? So 1 represents a confirmation, 0 represents negation, as in we're not going to recognize it. All right. So anyway, our answer to this, is this a face? We can say yes. Is it a man's face? We can say no. Now, if we said, is it a woman's face? We could put a 1 here and say yes, right? So anyway, all this really tells us is that there are different levels of confirming this information. And it may, depending on how we're asked, it may give us different levels of processing that information and recalling it, okay? And it's very complicated, and I could probably spend an entire day talking about how this works. But just understand that this is a fail-safe. According to this process theory, this is a fail-safe, so that if we lose, for example, if we lose our vision, we will still be able to process this information, because we've built those strengths across a mental process here, where this middle unit, okay? So anyway, that's PDP in a nutshell, okay? Anybody have any questions on PDP? I know I kind of glossed over it. It's not one of our popular theories, especially at this level, If you get into cognition, it might be a little bit more important to understand this, but I just kind of want to give you an explanation of what it looks like. All right. So levels of processing theory is a little bit, it's similar to that, but it operates on the premise of the level of information that we are required to know. Now, what do I mean by required to know? Required according to what? What would require us to remember something?
Like an emotional attachment.
Okay, attachment. Attachment's important, right? Attachment forms relationships. Relationships help us survive, right? So along with that, we can say level of attachment might be survival. You know, where did I get that food? Where did I get that tool to build things or protect myself? These are all reasons for survival, which means that we are going to probably pay attention to that environment a little bit better, right? What about expectations? Like a lot of you, and when we get into motivation, what motivates us? Why do some of you, and I'm sure I got some people in this class that do, why do some of you stress over memorizing your psychology book? Why is that important?
Security.
Pass the class.
So you can pass the class. Well, why is that important?
Because you want to graduate.
Because we want to graduate. Okay, what does graduation mean?
Success.
Success. Okay, so why is success important? We can go down this rabbit hole all day. And in the end, as a society, we have looked at these secondary and tertiary motivators that have created like a chain reaction to where you are today and why many of you have gotten into school. So we look at, and I hear it a lot, and I'm sure I could probably get a couple more answers from you as far as why is college important? So I can pay my bills. Bills are important so I can eat, so I can have shelter, right? Meet our biological needs, meet our security needs. So a lot of these things have just stemmed out, and partly because of society, a lot of it has to do with family values, and a lot of it might have to do with your experience in life. So anyway, depending on what our expectation is to know the stuff, we can either have a shallow understanding, or we can have a deep understanding of the information, okay? So shallow understanding. So let me give you an example. If I wanted to find out, let give you the example, is a word written in capital letters, okay? So let's say I'm going to give you the word boy. All right. So shallow understanding would be just being able to recognize. So if I said, is this word written in capital letters? What would your answer be? Might be a little bit different for everybody,
Yes,
right? So there is a capital letter. It's not all capital letters, right? But some of you may say yes or no. I'm not going to get too many maybes in there because that's not what I asked. So if I ask you yes or no, many of you might recognize that this is a capital B and answer yes. Many of you might say, well, they're not all capital letters, so I'm going to say no. It depends on the level of questioning. Now, if you start questioning that deeper, you might start looking at more of like an intermediate processing. Intermediate processing would look into that a little bit deeper. So if I asked you, does the word rhyme with toy? What would your answer be?
Yes.
It would. Yeah, you would say yes, right? Because now you're taking that syntax and breaking it apart and coming up with a little bit of a deeper meaning. Still not a definition yet, not a deep understanding of what exactly a boy is, but we're going beyond the letters now. We're kind of talking about sounds and relational sounds, right? Now, if we go a little bit deeper, and I said, would the word fit in a sentence? he met blank on the street. What would your answer be? Does that fit in that sentence? So if I said boy, does that make sense to you?
Sure.
You have to understand a little bit more about what a boy is. And it's not an inanimate object. So how can somebody meet a bike on the street, for example? So we can have many things that fit in here, but your meaning is a little bit deeper now. And that can go all the way into actually defining what a boy looks like, what defines a boy, so on and so forth, okay? So that's just an example of level of processing, all right? So again, many of you that are, if you're going into education or something, you'll learn lots about levels of processing, but this is just to kind of give you a quick understanding of what that is. Okay, so information processing is the model that we are going to be most familiar with. And when we get into learning, this is primarily what we're going to be using. So the information processing model looks at several processes excuse me. Long-term memory, short-term memory, or working memory, either one, and then sensory input. So let's say, for example, if I had played a song, I gave you a song at the very beginning of the class today, all right? You might have seen other people, other students that came in. Let's see, what else? I might ask you what I'm wearing, what color shirt I'm wearing. I'm aware that my camera is on and you can probably see that, but all this information just comes into your senses. And depending on the importance, and this goes back to the expectation of what it is that we need to learn. All of these things may not be significant to you. I use this example for when my class comes in to my face-to-face classes. What comes in when they come into the auditorium and I ask them how many light fixtures without looking are on the ceiling? How many of them do you think actually got that answer right?
Probably nobody.
Nobody. I don't think I've had anybody yet. But the reason why they're not giving me that answer is because it's not important for them to learn. They've put that into their routine. They've deemed that unnecessary to learn because it's not important for them to function in their daily routine, okay? So for example, let's test your memory here and see how your selective memory is, okay? New share. Okay, so for example, can anybody tell me which one is the actual penny? What is the real penny in this group?
F.
F, okay. Does anybody have any other guesses?
A.
A, all right. One A, one F.
J.
J, okay.
Go with D.
You go with B, all right. So
I said
we're a little, oh, E?
D is in Delta.
D, gotcha, okay. All right, so we got a little bit of everything here. I haven't heard anybody come up with the same one twice. So I'm gonna let you know the answer, it's A. right? Now we use this device, we use this money every day, don't we? Many of us probably have some in your pocket right now. So why don't we remember that? Because it wasn't important, right? Let me give you another one.
Yes.
Let me give you another one. See if anybody, I know at least most people drive. So which one is the stop sign? Which one's the actual stop sign? Each one of them have a little bit of a different characteristic, but you use this every day, multiple times a day. Anybody care to guess?
I think the ninth one.
The bottom right?
Just the one before the last one.
The
Eh,
bottom middle.
Yeah, middle, bottom middle.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
Over 3, down 2.
Over 3,
From
down
the
2. So
top
the
corner.
middle right.
Yeah, the middle right one. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? All right. So was that Richard that you said it was the middle right?
Yeah.
You got that one, man. That was close. So
I drive a lot.
what's that?
I drive a lot. I was looking at the textile. I didn't even worry about the border.
Okay, all right. So you can see that, but so this was not a bad option. The bottom middle was not a bad option, okay, because it does have the same font. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. So we don't have the borders. We don't have the red borders around it, and we have the white border. So those corner ones are out, and then of course type of uh, the type of font is a little bit different for the middle left and the top middle, right? So that leaves these three. So absolutely correct, Richard. Good job. All right. So again, when we look at where new share, go back to my. When we look at information that comes in and the importance of it, we're using what's called selective memory. So based on what are sensory inputs, this kind of goes through a buffer, and it says, what do I need to pay attention to? What is important for survival? What's important for my success in getting through whatever it is I need to get through? And based on that answer, it forwards that information, that selective information, to our short-term working memory, short-term memory or working memory. All right. Within that memory, it's a very finite amount of memory that we possess. Now, if you liken this to a computer, we'll call this like our sensory input would be like our mouse or a keyboard or camera. It's whatever information we use to input to our system, right? Now, sometimes we're not using our camera. Maybe we're not on a Zoom call. It's not important for our camera to be working. Or if we're just clicking around things, it's not important for our keyboard. But there might be a time when we need to input information or take a picture of something. And that's where the sensory buffer selects the information to go to our, does anybody, we had a computer major. What is our short-term memory in our computer?
the RAM.
RAM, absolutely. Good job, Pierre. All right, so our RAM, our random access memory, which is just our temporary. Many of you probably recognize that to be like 8 gig or 16 gig or something. You probably see that in the advertisement with the computer you bought. So that is just a couple sticks of memory within your computer that's temporary stores that information because it's what's up on your screen. It's what you're dealing with in that moment, or at least you were for a little bit ago, okay? So when you don't need that information anymore, so within that, we are processing that. We're processing that information within our brains. Let's say that you're studying for a trig test or a algebra test or something. You're constantly reviewing information that you just read, or maybe it's something that you had just talked about with your professor or your other students. But that information keeps getting rehearsed and recycled through a process we call rehearsal. Makes sense, right? Rehearsal. So what happens when we don't use that information anymore? We don't need it.
Clear.
So,
It's gonna clear up. Oh,
what's that? We store it, right? We store it to our long-term memory. All right. And that's kind of what happens with your RAM. You work with that information, and then somewhere, what's your long-term memory in your computer?
Hard disk drive.
Yeah, hard drive. Absolutely. And it stays in your hard drive for an infinite amount of time. Now, unlike our hard drive in our computer, either whether it's 500 gigabytes or 1 terabytes or whatever it is, 500 gigabytes or terabytes, whatever. We don't have a limit, or at least a measurable limit, to our long-term memory. Pretty wild, right? We can fit an infinite amount of information into our long-term memory. Now, that doesn't mean that we're picking up on everything that's going in. Some people do, actually. Some people do have that gift or curse or whatever you want to call it to take all that information in and store it to the long-term memory. It's very, very rare. It's called eidetic memory, but some people have that gift or curse again. But for the most part, many of us do have an unlimited long-term memory, but it only works with our short term, whatever we process and select into our short term. Okay. So when I say unlimited, that doesn't mean that we remember everything that has ever happened. As I think it was Emily that had mentioned earlier, we tend to mature. We think of things a little bit differently. When we get to forgetting, we'll talk a little bit more about that, like what is retrograde forgetting versus proactive forgetting. So there might be, reactive and proactive forgetting. So what that means is that we have information that supersedes that. So we may learn, for example, I worked with a woman. I told her that I was getting stationed in Alaska, and she was really shocked to hear that I was driving to Alaska. Now, why is that? Why would somebody be shocked that I could drive to Alaska? When you look at the map of the United States, where does Alaska appear?
Alaska is not what's the word is?
Does
I
it
don't
look
know the word,
connected?
but I know it's separate from the other state.
Right. It's not one of the 48 contiguous states, right? So
Yeah.
like Hawaii appears in a box because they can't show on scale how far Alaska and Hawaii are. Otherwise, that map would not be proportionate. So they put it in a little box. Hawaii is in a little box right off of California, and right north of Hawaii is Alaska in a little box, and it doesn't show anything to do with Canada. So this woman that I work with, she had no idea that Canada was between United States and Alaska. Now, there was nothing wrong with her. She just never had to experience, she never had to go through Canada. She never really even looked at a map of where Alaska is in relation to United States. And we may have all had that kind of weird moment where most people might know something and we did not. But what happened is that she retrieved that information out of her long-term memory and reprocessed that. And our conversation was enough to help her understand and overwrite that information that Alaska is not an island. So Alaska was still stored in there, but now it's connected to Canada and you can drive there. So that kind of deepened her knowledge. You see how that works? Am I making sense?
Yes.
No pun intended. I just showed all those pennies a little bit earlier. Okay. So how do we take in information? we have little tricks that we might use to encode, because again, we don't just take it all in at one time. It'd be impossible for us to do that. So let me start off with, let's see how well you do. I'm just going to give you a couple seconds to look at this image. And I want, now everybody pay attention. I want to see who gets this. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to view it, and then I'm going to take it down, okay? So no cheating, no recording. All right, ready? All right. Who's got it? Did anybody get it without writing it?
No.
No? Okay. Let's try it again. All right. Let's try it again. Who got it?
Is it X, NBC, PhD, SAT, and then dang it, I don't remember the last ones.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
CBS and then X.
Okay. All right. Was that a little bit more manageable, the second one that I showed you?
Oh, definitely,
Yes.
because you separated it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was the same letters. It's just how I presented it to you and how you were able to memorize it. So, and that example according to your book is chunking. So when we look at information in a way that it makes sense to us, we might use a rhythm to it. We might use mnemonics. Many of you are familiar with mnemonics. You might have come up with. I know a lot of people do state capitals to a song. I don't know. I don't remember what the song was, but I've heard somebody bring that up as an example, right? All right, so let me give you another list. Speaking of mnemonics.
Now, would that be with like credit cards? Why they break the numbers up every 4 numbers?
Well, it could be, but how many people remember 16 digits of a credit card? Maybe somebody does.
I meant for like entry, being able to read 4 at a time and breaking it down instead of having to put all at once.
Right.
And lose a spot.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're reading it, so it may not be a memory issue, but it might be a rhythmic issue. So you're able to read it in chunks, and somebody might be able to receive it a little bit better in chunks, as opposed to coming up with your own way of breaking that up. It might confuse the retailer, whoever's taking that credit card number over the phone, right? So let me give you another example here. All right, give you about 10 seconds here and see what you come up with. All right, who got it? Anybody? Did anybody come up with a pattern that might look like? All right, let me give it to you again.
It sounded like numbers when I was reading it in my head.
Okay, all right, so you want to take a stab at it?
I just remember sun, tree, and then 5 chicken.
I think it was
Okay.
like,
Go ahead.
It was.
no, yeah, I don't think I got it.
All right, let's look at it again, all right? So this is a process we call mnemonics. And again, many people try and do this with memorizing lists that they already know and associating it with new lists so that they can remember things a little bit more efficiently. So if you look at, if I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, chicken, I don't know why 10 is chicken, but you kind of see what that pattern is, right? So if I asked you again, if I took that down again, how many of you would try and do that now?
I think it was like sun, shoe, tree, hive.
Right there.
Lost door in there.
Door,
Door?
hive.
Door, hive, sticks.
Heaven gate, his gates of heaven.
Okay.
We can, yeah.
Hive and chicken.
Vine is in between.
Vine and chicken. Very good. Okay, so we got that as a group when we were able to throw in mnemonics in there, right? So very good. All right. So anyway, these are just little tricks that we use, and again, your book really goes through a lot of examples of that. Okay. Within, let me share my screen with you once again. So that's how information gets encoded. So let's talk about how we are able to recall. Okay, so there are different strategies for recalling things, and we call this, for recall, we have something that's called serial position effect, which your book described. Now, serial position effect looks at one of three options. In what order they're in, or serial, primacy, and recency. Now, a lot of these, I'm proud and ashamed to say, occur in advertising. Okay, so for example, how many of you maybe have visited a department store over the weekend, and either Target or Walmart?
Went to Walmart yesterday.
Okay, what was the first thing you saw when you walked through the door?
I do recall a lady standing probably about, I don't know, 10 feet to the left. There was a guy that came through the door pretty quickly, and I almost ran into this one lady in the return line.
Okay, all right, so you kind of had an experience there. What about product?
Halloween stuff.
Halloween stuff. Okay, all right. Yeah, exactly. So you walk in the door, and the first thing that you see is whatever they want you to see. This is called primacy. So they are not only encoding information for you, but they're having you being able to recall exactly what. So let's say, for example, maybe you're familiar with Walmart or Target, you know where all the sections are. But say you're walking past the clothing aisle and down the middle, and what's there, for example, you might have a harder time remembering that. So they put what they want you to see in the beginning, and they sometimes do that in the end too, because which is called recency. So primacy is the beginning of a series, and recency is the end of a series. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of how this works. All right, so pay attention to the words I say. Maple, subway, poison, tiger, ceiling, lawyer, ocean, paper, garbage, thunder, sofa, mountain, dollar, wagon, doorbell. All right. So what was the first word that I said?
Maple.
Okay. What was the second word? What was the last word?
About poison after maple?
Okay, poison was in there. Uh-huh.
Doorbell was the last.
Doorbell was the last. Okay. What was before doorbell? What was the next to last?
Wagon.
Wagon. Okay. Before wagon? What's happening here? So our first, or primacy, our recent, or last. What was in the middle? Can anybody remember the ones in the middle?
I think you had paper in it.
You
Okay.
have dollars. You have dollars.
Dollar, paper, okay. Dollar was actually smack dab in the middle. So very good with that. Dollar was towards the end. Okay, so more recency. So what this is showing is that if I did a study and asked a group of students or participants to recall this, this is what it would look like. So the number of recall that students or participants would be able to recall is going to be higher in the first and last, and there's going to be a spike in the middle. All right, and this is what we call serial position effect. All right, pretty cool, right? Let me try this again. Actually, I'm not going to do this list. I'm going to do this list a little bit later when we talk about forgetting, because we're kind of running up on time here. So anyway, these are different ways that we're able to recall information, and again, we might use we might use talking ourselves through it. Like, for example, if we have a tip of the tongue, many of you have maybe experienced a tip of the tongue where you knew an actor's name or you knew a singer's name or an artist, and you just couldn't think of it. So you recall, you pull all that information from your long-term memory, like what songs do they sing, what do they look like, just to try and piece together what their name is. So those are some of the strategies you might use for recalling information. Okay, so I'm going to stop here because we're going to get into problems with recall and forgetting on Wednesday. All right, and we're going to have some pretty interesting discussions on how that occurs. I think I actually had a video. Let me. Oh yeah. One more test for you before we. Oh, yeah. I meant to mention Stroop effect. So Stroop effect, one of the ways that we, let me make sure, actually that's going to be in forgetting too. Let me put a pin in that as well, I think. Bear with me. So do we have any questions before we depart today? I'll get to the assignments here. I want to give you a few minutes just to talk about groups and assignments and stuff. I just want to make sure we all got this. All right. All right. Yep, I think that we're going to be covering that on Stroop effect on Wednesday. All right, any questions? All right. How about anything regarding assignments next week? Oh my gosh, next week, is it, are we coming up on week 7 next week? We are. Yeah. Holy cow. So that is midterm week. Woohoo! All right. So let me talk about midterm before we depart today. So midterm, I'm going to open it up on Monday. You will have until Friday, I think. Let me see. You have until Friday to complete it. It's due by Friday. All right. And the reason why
it's due this Friday?
It's due next Friday. So it's going to open up next Monday, and it'll be open until next Friday. So plan on taking it between Monday and Friday. And it could be at any time that you want. Before the end of the week, I'm going to post, you can either do this now, you can use your quizzes as a study guide for now. I know it only gives you 10 out of how many those items that are available. However, I'm going to be later this week, probably over the weekend, I'm going to post a study guide for, it's the quizzes, the same quizzes, but it's just going to be all of them, all of the items open. It's not going to give you the correct answers. It's going to be like your regular quizzes, but instead of 10 at a time, you're going to have all of them at one shot. So use those as a study guide and take them often, because that's going to really help you with the success of your midterm. pretty straightforward. All the items are going to be pulled directly from the quizzes. So again, if you want to get a head start, you can start taking past quizzes as many times as you want. So we are not going to have any lessons on next week. However, I will be available for anybody that wants to talk about assignments or grades or whatever. So kind of like an office hours during that time, if you will. But no lessons will be covered next week. All right. Any questions?
When is the project due again?
What's that?
When is the project due again?
Project is going to be due. Well, you have different things due different weeks. So, for example, the end of this week, you'll have your outline. Your group will have to put together an outline of what you're going to be doing, and then week 9, I believe, is going to be your rough draft is due, and then by week 12, you're going to have your presentation of like a draft of your presentation, or what do I have? Presentation proposal, how you're going to do your presentation. Just a quick little write-up. And then week 15, we're going to do live presentations and maybe have some extra credit for people that want to provide critiques or something like that. Okay. So
Wait.
a lot of fun stuff. You got a lot of time to work on this, but start, don't wait till last minute. Don't be a procrastinator. Okay. Start working ahead and thinking about what you're going to do. All right.
So it's required to have like a live presentation?
Yeah. Yep. So
And you have to put your face in the camera and everything?
I'm not going to require a face in the camera. If that's not what you want to do, some people like doing that. Some people don't. Most people don't. But I do require voice and some kind of graphic or visual. So that would be the two. And of course, you can look at those requirements on week 15, week 12 and week 15. It should show you what I'm going to be looking for with those. Okay.
Do you want like one person to do the presentation or like two? Okay, so it's up to us basically.
Yep. Up to you.
Does the midterm have a time limit?
It does. And let me tell you what that time limit is. So you'll be 50 multiple choice questions worth 2 points each. You have 90 minutes to take that exam.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anything else? All right. If nothing else, I'll hang back for a few minutes. I'm going to stop recording now. I'll